Of you who are just joining us today, maybe for the first time, we have been following a devotional guide for Advent from Illustrated Ministry, which is called Do Not Be Afraid. Week 3 in our devotional is all about the practice of joy. There is a great quote, which is on page 15 if you are following along in the book. And this quote starts, when so much in the world feels uncertain or unsafe, when it takes a tremendous amount of emotional energy to navigate each day's difficulties, joy can seem like a luxury, a fleeting grace, like something that doesn't belong as part of our routine. But could we cultivate a practice of joy? That's what we do with things that are not yet easy and natural parts of our daily lives. We practice. Could joy fall into that category? Could we practice delighting in some piece of each new day, meeting each new person with wonder, treasuring each connection? The authors of our booklet suggest that what we are seeing when a multitude of the heavenly hosts appears to the shepherds, praising God and singing, as the song goes, is a crowd of angels helping the shepherds to practice joy, giving them a good example of how they should respond to the good news of God being born into the world, basically starting the party for them. And the shepherds joined in that party. They listened to the angel's message, and they chose joy over fear. And then their joy grew legs, and it walked them all the way to a stable in Bethlehem, where they found that God was there to meet them. So how might we practice joy as we make this Advent journey? And what practices will keep us moving toward that humble stable where the Christ child was born? I want to talk today a little bit about a practice that I have been doing since Advent started. I'm part of a contemplative prayer and meditation group that meets every week. And during the first week of Advent, we started making 2 lists that corresponded to the Advent theme every week. First, we'd think about the things that get in the way of us experiencing hope or peace or joy. And then we'd write them down. And then we would do the opposite. We would spend time in praying and meditating in the presence of God. And then we would list the things that bring us hope or peace. And this week, we're going to be doing joy. So there was something I noticed that first week after I was done with the second list. And I've been thinking about it since then. And it wasn't that I had trouble listing things that bring me joy or hope or peace. And I am thankful for that. All of us have experienced a time when that first list is looming so large that it is hard to feel hopeful or peaceful and certainly joyful. But what I noticed was something else. It was that my lists seemed very separate from each other. It was almost like I had this one room where I could put those difficult things and then we would think about them. And then, those hope stealers or the peace destroyers. And then when it was time, I just walked into that other room and I had this other room and then I could fill that room up with the peace and the hope and the joy and, all those great things that we find in the presence of God. And now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with those joys that take us out of our sorrows or that allow us to think about something else for a while, because we need that. We need that for our health, especially at times when sorrow is heaviest. The joys that we cultivate may be one of 100 things that have nothing to do with those things that are troubling us. And of course, it's more than okay to, for example, go bird watching when you're tired out from being a caregiver for a sick relative and need a break, or to eat cookies and watch your favorite movie when you're really tired of being sick, and that is necessary. And it is a spiritual practice to see beauty and to seek enjoyment in the world that God created, to find joy in that. But I did wonder what would happen if I could start drawing lines between my two lists, matching up those things that stole my peace or my hope or my joy with the things that generated peace and hope and joy. What if I could bring my practice of joy into contact with those things that hurt the most right now? Those things that I am the most anxious about. What if there were joys that I could bring into the same room with those sorrows and those anxieties and the heaviness of the world? And if I truly believe that God's life-giving presence is the source of my joy, just imagine what that joy might be able to do in that room if we just let it loose in there. Because I think that it's when those two things touch that joy can do its deepest healing. Can we hold joy and sorrow at the same time over the same event or the same person? Can our joy temper that sorrow, letting in enough air and light that it has the chance to grow and change over time? Can experiencing joy that flies in the face of injustice help fuel our work in the world? Can finding joy in spite of trauma help us to heal? I would say the answer is yes, especially when we can experience that joy as coming from God's presence in our lives. Are there joys that we can cultivate that are related to those things that trouble us? So what if one of the things that's disturbing peace and joy at home is, I don't know, maybe kids that argue a lot, for example. Okay, fine, that's one of mine. So when I thought about this, and I did ask before I discussed this with all of you, so I've decided that one practice of joy that I want to cultivate is that I'm going to sit down with my kids and we're going to play board games a couple times a week. I'm also going to try to be more mindful of how I react when those arguments happen, but that's sort of more of a peace practice, I think. This one that I chose, I wanted one that cultivates enjoyment and that we can find a moment where we're all having fun together. But the point of it is that I wanted them to be grounded in love. And joy has a lot to do with love, I think. And the reason I want that is because when they have to do hard things, like regulate themselves, when someone takes their turn on the video game they've been waiting for, they have a solid foundation and full tanks to work with when they have to face that. And this is what grounding our joy in God's love and presence can do for us grown-ups too. So when we find grounding in that experience of being loved, of being wanted, of being secure that we are held and that we are accepted for who we are, we can do those hard things too. We can do brave things. We can face difficulties in our lives and come through it. We can face sickness and loss and pain. And we don't have to lose the core of who we are or our ability to find joy and strength in the presence of God. We can find that grounding for our very being, for our whole existence, in the experience of God's presence. We can find that in the community. We can find that in our family. We can find that in the faith we share. And we can find that when we pray and when we meditate. And in the infinite ways that we can connect to God in this world, which is different for each of us. And the reason that helps is because then we can realize that God is with us wherever we are. So I wanted you to do a short version of that exercise, and just want you to think of something that is stealing your joy this year. You don't have to make the full list. Just maybe think of something, whatever pops to mind. But then I want you to return to that place where you abide in God and where God abides in you, where you know that you are loved unconditionally for who you are, where you are connected to the true vine. And then think about something that brings you joy. Now, what is one joyful practice that you might cultivate during Advent and Christmas this year? Just pick one. And, it's a bonus if that practice does touch any of those joy stealers you were first thinking about. Maybe it's something that might be able to bring transformation or at least a new perspective to them. So, Phil, I thought it would be, here, let me get back off of speaker view here so I can see Phil. Phil, do you think that we might be able to get into breakout rooms for the next 4 minutes? Do you think that would work?
Here we go.
All right, so before we go, this is your assignment. When we go into breakout rooms, we're gonna be there for about 4 minutes. It's gonna just randomly assign you. And if you feel comfortable, share one joyful practice that you wanna cultivate this Advent. And if you feel like it, you can share why, but just share what you're comfortable with. And sorry, Phil, I cut you off.
Here we go.